Hi everyone, it's Stephanie with Wolf and Sheep, and I'm here with another spinning video. Today is day 3 of the Tour de Fleece, and I have finished spinning one bobbin full of thick and thin yarn, this one right here, and we're going to show you some different plying methods today. I've had a request to do more videos on plying, so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to take this thick and thin yarn and I'm going to show you different ways that you can ply it to get different results. What I'm using as my plying thread is a commercially prepared bamboo. Okay, this is a little bit thicker than I would normally use for a plying thread with a thick and thin yarn. Normally I like something that is maybe a single and lace weight, but I wanted to use something for this video that would show up. So I had this bright pink yarn in my stash already, and I thought this would be something you could easily see on this video. So let's get started. We're going to go ahead and hold, I've got the spun yarn, the thick and thin, on my left, and I have the plying yarn on my right. We're going to go ahead and start, as we always do, with putting both yarns together, holding them together, putting them through the leader, and then because we spin clockwise, we are going to ply counterclockwise. And I believe I've mentioned on a prior video that with art yarn, I always spin the first couple of yards just plain. I don't do anything fancy with it, and that's so that if I'm casting on for a project, I have enough normal yarn to do so. So we're going to get started, and with this first little bit of plying, I'm just going to hold the two yarns like this in a V. I'm going to ply normally for the first little bit just to get us started, but then I'm going to start changing the way I hold both the plying yarn and the spun yarn, the singles, because that's the trick to plying. It just depends on how you change your hands, how you change the direction you're holding your yarn. So first what I'm going to do, you see right now I'm holding it in a V like this. I'm just going to widen the V. So instead of like this, I'm going to do this. And what we'll get is, instead of a lot of the singles showing through, it's wrapping more with the plying yarn. So you almost have a core spun effect. Let me pull some out and show you. I'm going to try and get this close enough so that you can see the difference. Okay, so that's going to be hard to see. Okay, so here you can see it's a little lighter. I've got a towel on my lap so that you can kind of see the difference. You can see the light versus the dark pink. Now when I widened the V right here, you can see it's very dark pink. That's because the plying yarn covered up the spun yarn. Okay, that's what happened there. So now if I change it and widen it but hold the plied yarn up just a little bit, so I'm still widening the V, but I'm holding this spun yarn up. So instead of like this, I'm holding it up. Now it's going to wrap around the plying yarn, and we're going to have more of the light pink in here. Okay, and now I'm getting to a thick spot, and look what happens when I get to this thick spot if I'm holding it up like this. You get a really pretty, let's see if I can get you closer in here. You get this really pretty, almost shell-like pattern. So as you can see, I'm only changing the position of my hands. Now, let's go the other way. Let's do this up, but instead of just holding the plying yarn up, we still are at a wide angle. We're holding the plying yarn up, and I'm going to go back and forth with it, okay? And I'm going to hold it loosely. I'm just holding it like this. I'm not pulling on it at all. I'm just sort of throwing the yarn, the plying yarn, over the spun yarn. And here is what we get. We get this really cool kind of jumbled effect right there. So again, just the difference in how we're holding our hands. Okay, so we're going to go back to just doing a typical ply. And then we're coming to a thick spot right here. So what I normally do when I'm coming to a thick spot, because I want to hold it in place, is I stop right about here and I start that back and forth, tossing the yarn with my plying yarn, and then I let it spin right here for a little bit more, right before the thick and thin spot, just so that it kind of anchors that in place. And now I'm going to switch again, hold the spun yarn up so that I get that neat sort of shell effect. And you can see I have two little knots right here before that shell effect. Oops. I'm trying to get this close enough so that you all can really see. Okay. And now I'm going to move my plying yarn. I'm going to move it again. There we go. I'm going to move it back and forth to kind of lock in this end of the shell. Okay, so we see I'm going to just back and forth here, sort of just tossing the yarn. And now I'm going to switch again. Go back to sort of a typical normal ply. And I feel another thick spot coming up. So I'm going to switch, hold this up, toss it back and forth, ply normally for a minute, toss it back and forth, right at the edge of the thick spot, and now I'm going to switch and hold this spun yarn up and let it go over here. Switch again so that it anchors down that thick and thin spot, and there we go. Let me show you this. So you see, what we have here are little anchors on either side of the thick and thin spot. So that's one technique you can do when you're doing a thick and thin yarn. Let's get to another one. What you can do is hold your plying yarn straight toward your stomach, and you can let your spun yarn wrap around it like this, okay? And then what you can simply do is push it forward, and you create these coils. Let me do a little bit more so we have some that's built up here so you can see it at a close-up angle. So you let the spun yarn just coil around your plied yarn, and then you just come back here and push. Now this takes a lot of your spun yarn to make a very small effect, but it's pretty neat. It's a pretty neat effect. Let's see if we can get in here. You see this right here? It's all coiled around the commercially prepared plying yarn. So that's another effect you can do. And then you can just switch off and do the other way. You can just let the commercial yarn go around the spun yarn, and then push it forward. And you can see this dark pink spot. That's where we've pushed the plying yarn forward here. And you can go back and forth like that if you'd like to. So you can have spots of this bright pink, spots of this light white color, and they make little coils. So you see, it's all just in the way that you hold the yarn, okay? Now let's keep going here because this is pretty interesting. What I'm going to do this time though, before I have held the thick spots up like this and let it wrap around the plying yarn, now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to let the plying yarn wrap around the thick spot. And what this does is it features a little bit more of the plying yarn. Instead of hiding the plying yarn, it makes it more visible right here. You see? You can see that pink a little bit more in the plying yarn. So that's really all there is to plying. You play around with it. It's just having fun with what you're doing. It's experimenting and finding different angles at which to hold your yarn, both of them. Don't just play with the plying yarn, play with the spun yarn and see what you come up with. There's all kinds of different ways you can experiment, you can have fun with it, make different patterns. The key is just to be loose with it and have fun with it. Don't feel trapped into doing something only one way. This is art yarn. It's supposed to be creative. It's supposed to be freeing. And that's what I'd like to see you all do. See, here's a nice little, and what you can think about is making a pattern with it. As you'll see here, I have held the spun yarn over the plying yarn, and I have a little knot here. Then I switched. Here I held the plying yarn over top of the spun yarn, and then here we have a thick section that I held over top of the plying yarn, went back to holding the plying yarn over top of the spun yarn, and then ended with holding the spun yarn over top of the plying yarn. So you can see it's a little pattern, and you can do that with it also. So there's really no end to the number of things that you can do while plying, to the effects that you can make with your art yarn. I chose to do this with thick and thin yarn, but you can do this with core spun yarn. You can do it with just two traditionally spun yarns. There's no reason why you couldn't just toss one traditionally spun yarn like this back and forth to get this jumbled section. There's no reason you couldn't do this with two traditionally spun yarns to have this as a little effect in here. So experiment, play around with it, and let me know what you end up with. I'd love to see your results on the Facebook page. And tomorrow is when we will be announcing the winner of our giveaway, so please tune in for that. But until next time, I'm Stephanie Nipper with Wolf and Sheep. I hope to see you in the Facebook group, and thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.